Yo, corner's like a dream. Feels fast. Oh. Woo! Oh. Oh, see, this thing just popped over the whole thing. Oh, yo, the cornering. Oh, yes, boy. The pop.
How's it going, everyone? Welcome back to the Blue Sky Boys riding bikes that are just way too good for them. The legends at Pivot New Zealand have sent us this tasty Blue Sky Boys blue Pivot Switchblade to just go for a hoon on, and we decided to make a bit of a review. I actually rode one of these a few years ago at a demo day, and since then I've been telling James he really needs to get on one, so I'm super stoked we're able to make it happen. Now, to clarify, Pivot have not paid us to make this video, nor do we get to keep the bike, obviously, and they definitely don't get a say in our opinions. Although after a good few rides, I have to say our opinions are largely positive.
So, this Pivot Switchblade that we're testing is a size large. I'm 5'11", which is, pretty much 6 foot if you round it up. And Finn's 6'3", he's a tall bloke. This large frame has a 470mm reach, which is actually the exact same as my personal bike, so it's a perfect fit for me. It is on the smaller side for Finn, but he kind of has made it work. He likes a smaller bike anyway. So just to quickly run through the important geo numbers of this bike, it has a 66-degree head tube angle, a 75.5-degree seat tube angle, and super short 431mm chainstays. If you're a bike nerd like us, you'll probably notice that these are pretty conservative numbers, nothing too modern there, but they do actually come with their own pros and cons, which we'll get to later in the video. The Switchblade's frame is fully carbon, both front and rear triangles, which are held together with two super chunky links, which make up Dave Weagle's fantastic suspension design, the DW link.
So the spec we are riding is a little bit of a mix match of parts. We've got a 2022 factory Fox 36, the original factory DPX2 back from 2020. We've got code RSC brakes and a full X01 drivetrain, along with just some regular old Stans wheels. The suspension feels really good actually, especially the fork. The drivetrain and brakes are pretty good, especially the shifter, but they have had quite a few miles, so it's kind of not really fair to be super picky about them. The wheels are nothing really special, but solid alloy option. We don't want to go on too much about the components because it's really the frame that makes up the unique characteristic of this bike. So if you have any questions, just drop them down below.
So the first thing you probably all want to know is, how does this bike descend? Because of course that is the fun part, but it's a trail bike, and to go down you have to go up. So on to climbing. Well, the most obvious thing for me when climbing, and this will probably come as no surprise, is the incredible pedaling platform that the DW link provides. It felt really neutral. I didn't feel any pedal bob whatsoever. I could actually feel the anti-squat doing its thing when I was grinding up the steeper climbs. And this was with the shock wide open. It could absorb all the bumps of the trail, all the roots on the more technical climbs. It held its traction really well, but I just felt like all my energy was actually being used to climb rather than compressing the shock. One thing I did notice, especially on the steeper climbs, was that it was a bit harder to keep the front wheel down. I attribute this to the not so steep seat tube angle and the really short stays that the back of this bike has. Nothing really to do with the front of the bike at all. This was never an unexpected feeling. I could always tell where the rear wheel was, and I never actually looped out, but it was just something that was playing on my mind more often than not on the steeper climbs, and it was something you just had to pay a lot of attention to and really lean forwards to prevent it from happening.
One thing I said to James while we were riding in Rotorua is I actually kind of felt like when you're climbing, it has a little bit of an extra boost compared to other bikes I've ridden. And this was at the part of the day where my legs had just nothing left to give, so that was pretty cool. I think this comes down to three things. The weight of the overall bike is quite low, The DW Link is a fantastic pedaling platform, and the whole rear end along with the carbon cranks is just really stiff, so you get a really zippy feeling on the climbs. So now you're up the hill, you get to come down. Pivot described this bike, well, exactly like this. It unleashes dominance over enduro-inspired descents, generates speed and delivers the finesse needed for power moves on technical climbs. The all-new Switchblade cleans the impossible, threads the needle and delivers the freedom to explore. From bike park flow trails to raw backcountry routes, the Switchblade amplifies every rider's skill and excels on any trail. Batteries not included. Like, I can't believe I got that first try. While I don't completely disagree with this opinion, I do feel like they're kind of understating the most notable characteristic of this bike, and that is the amount of pop and its desire to play. This thing just belongs on party laps where you pull for the most stupid optional lines off the side of the trail. It really doesn't ride like anything I've ever ridden before. I'm definitely not saying that you can't do regular trail riding on it, but I do feel like the regular trail rider might find this a little bit twitchy at high speed compared to other options. But that twitch is just its itch to get off the ground and never come back down. This thing just flies, and you really do actually have to plan for it.
Oh, she goes. The pop!
The rear suspension has a really comforting bottomless feel. You do use up the travel fairly quickly, which sounds kind of contradictory, but it does it in a really predictable ramp up, and that makes this actually a really solid jumping platform. If you like jibbing on the descents like I do, I don't think you can get anything better than the Switchblade, especially if you need it to do trail bike things as well, compared to something like the Pivot Shadowcat, which is just a full-on party machine. I actually wrote this in my notes app while we were filming the clips for this video. I said, I feel like the Pivot Switchblade enhances the parts of my riding style and skill that I actually like, and it kind of just makes me forget about all the stuff that I'm not very good at. So take from that what you will.
The thing that I noticed most about this bike, apart from its playfulness and poppiness, was actually the cornering. This surprised me the most. And especially on flatter corners without much of a berm to support you. Like, I could really lean the bike over, keeping my body weight central, just having it leant over underneath me. Usually this feels kind of weird and I have to focus on weighting a front or back wheel, but on this bike it all just came super naturally to me. I could lean it over way more than I expected, and it just took a lot more to actually get to the point of breaking traction compared to anything else that I've ridden. It really felt like it was on rails. I think this comes down to the geo of the bike, especially the steeper head tube angle and those super short chainstays. They create a smaller wheelbase for the size of the frame, and that makes it really easy to whip it around corners, keeping weight centered on both wheels to get really good grip through the corner. Riding trails that were fast, not super aggressive, but blown out with lots of roots and braking bumps was really the only time I noticed the smaller amount of rear travel. The back end just didn't track the ground quite as well as I expected. It felt more chattery and was quite like ba 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 over consecutive bumps rather than actually tracking and absorbing everything. Oh. Woo! Does feel pretty bumpy. This probably could be fixed with a more enduro style shock that comes on the new models like the Float X compared to the very trail-esque DPX2 that this bike has. Another thing I noticed about this bike, especially on the more aggressive descents, was that it was not quite as quiet compared to other modern trail bikes. I found that the cable routing grommets would hold the 5mm brake hose really well, but not the 4mm gear cable and dropper cable. They can move very easily in the frame with those grommets tight. Upon taking off these grommets, we could see that it was just a hollow down tube in there, and for a boutique bike like this, I would have expected to see some tube-in-tube style cable routing in there like other brands do, to really hold those cables the entire way down so that they can't rattle and can't move. So I've always been a fan of the longer, lower, slacker trend that's going on in mountain biking, and the 66-degree head tube angle doesn't exactly follow that trend, so I didn't have high hopes for the geometry of the front end of this bike. However, it surprised me greatly. The steeper head angle means that the front wheel is a little bit more underneath you than in front of you. Now on really steep terrain, this might be a bit disconcerting, but on small to medium sized rooty drops, I surprisingly found that this was actually very helpful. So if you imagine a super slack head angle on a bike, the front wheel is going to be so far out in front of you that when you do any kind of smaller drop or compression, the back end's just going to flick down and create a bit more of an aggressive compression for the back of the bike. But with this steeper head angle, this meant that the fork could absorb a lot more of that energy, so it was a softer landing through the legs. We found this really interesting because it shows that slacker is not always better, and it made us both wonder if there are characteristics that are being lost with the new trend of longer, lower slacker across all bikes. The chainstay protection on this bike is very, very good and very thorough. Not only is it on the chainstay, but it's also underneath the seat stay the entire way across. We even have some more here to prevent heel rub, and it's designed to be very, very quiet. There is a rubber protector on top of the lower link to prevent dirt and debris getting into the link and into the bearing, so that is very, very good. However, if you did want to take the rear triangle off or do a bearing replacement on that link, then you would need to actually unstick this rubber piece from the frame, and that would be such a pain to have to do. The geometry adjustment link just above the rocker link here is very subtle, very hidden away. You can't really tell that's what it's going to do, and it's also very easy to swap out and change the geo. Unfortunately, the bearings that are pressed into the rocker link are very exposed. Some bikes will have hardware covering the seals of the bearing, but these ones, you can see full red seals, which means there's only one layer of protection against dirt and grime getting right in there. This is not so ideal for the longevity of the bearings. However, at least for this link, it is very easy to be able to press them out and put new ones in.
As a lot of you know, my personal bike is an alloy Canyon Spectral 29er, probably one of the most popular trail bikes in 2023. James's Common Cell Meta AM is kind of just a completely different category, and it's not really worth comparing, but my bike is direct competition, so I was really interested to see how they would compare. So they are actually extremely different despite being both 29er trail bikes. The Spectral is a lot more race bred and is kind of grasping at the coattails of the enduro category with a long wheelbase, slack head tube and slightly longer chainstays. The Switchblade is definitely far away from racy, but I don't even really think it's on the same axis of this made up graph. It's almost like out there in the land of being a free ride bike for people that love a big day out in the saddle. The Spectral is definitely a lot more stable at speed, and I'd be more comfortable taking it into big bike park terrain. That being said, the couple hours I spent on this Switchblade while we were filming is probably the most fun I've had on a bike in a really long time. So back in 2020 when I first rode this bike, it was spec'd with the Reynolds carbon wheel upgrade. So that's the Reynolds rim on Industry 9 Hydra hubs. That's a viciously stiff wheel set. And when we pulled this out of the box and I saw it had an alloy wheel set, I was a little bit worried that this spec might be missing some of that like insane pop that I felt the first time I rode it. But after taking this out, I can safely say that all that pop comes from that linkage. And while the wheels are a little bit heavier on this model, it doesn't create that characteristic. We could have tried James's Bontrager carbon wheels, but thanks to the less prolific Super Boost rear hub spacing, we couldn't. And that's why we're not a fan of Super Boost. While the bike does have a really stiff rear end, I think most of that just comes from their material choice and engineering, not so much from the Super Boost spacing.
So at the end of the day, a bike that is now 3 years old and has pretty conservative geo numbers, it is still very, very relevant now in 2023. I think this bike is for someone who prefers playing and having fun on a trail over going as fast as possible. It's for someone that loves to spend a whole day in the saddle doing big climbs and big traverses, as well as having a solid party lap to finish off the day. Being that this bike is 3 years old, we are, I guess, expecting to see an update soon-ish. Who knows in this market. If they do release a new Switchblade, I would like to see, I guess, a couple of changes. First thing would be to modernize the geometry just a touch, a little bit slacker so that it is more stable on the higher speeds and steeper trails, a steeper seat tube angle so that it is just a bit easier to climb, and then a longer reach to accommodate for that. As I said earlier, some improved internal cable routing throughout the frame would be a nice finishing touch. This combined with the updated Geo would make this a pretty unbeatable trail bike.
This thing is just straight up ridiculously fun. We're both very sad to have to send it back. Just want to thank you guys for watching, and thank you to Pivot NZ for sending this bike. You guys are absolute legends. We've linked your Instagram and website down in the description, so if you want to go check out the bikes and learn more about them, head down there. We've also got more bike reviews coming, not just on Pivot bikes. There's some really cool things in the pipeline, so make sure you subscribe, drop kick that bell icon, and we'll see you next time.